The Second World War transformed military logistics on a scale never before witnessed. Armies numbering millions required constant resupply across continents and oceans. Traditional surface transport proved inadequate for the speed and range demanded by modern mechanized warfare. Heavy transport aircraft emerged as the solution, capable of moving troops, equipment, and critical supplies across vast distances in hours rather than weeks. These machines bypassed enemy naval blockades, sustained encircled garrisons, delivered paratroopers behind enemy lines, and evacuated wounded soldiers from remote battlefields. Every major power recognized that strategic airlift capability would prove decisive in determining victory or defeat. American heavy transport development. The Douglas C-47 Skytrain became the most consequential transport aircraft of the entire war. Derived from the civilian DC-3 airliner, the C-47 entered military service in 1941 and quickly proved indispensable. Its twin radial engines provided reliable power, while its robust construction allowed operations from unprepared airstrips. The aircraft carried 28 fully equipped troops, or 6,000 pounds of cargo. C-47s dropped American and British paratroopers over Normandy during the D-Day invasion, towed gliders laden with additional forces, and resupplied advancing armies across Europe. In the Pacific theater, they sustained isolated garrisons, evacuated wounded from jungle airstrips, and transported supplies over the Himalayan hump route into China. The Soviet Union received nearly 3,000 through Lend-Lease, employing them on every front from Stalingrad to Berlin. More than 10,000 were built, serving with air forces across the globe. Pilots universally praised its handling characteristics, mechanical reliability, and ability to absorb battle damage. The Curtiss C-46 Commando entered service as a larger, more capable complement to the C-47. Designed specifically for military use rather than adapted from civilian origins, the C-46 featured a wider fuselage and more powerful engines. It carried 40 troops or 10,000 pounds of cargo, nearly double the C-47's capacity. The aircraft found its most critical employment flying the treacherous hump route between India and China. Japanese forces had severed the Burma Road, making aerial resupply the only means of sustaining Chinese armies and American air units operating from Chinese bases. C-46s climbed over 15,000-foot mountain passes, battled severe turbulence and icing conditions, and endured Japanese fighter attacks. The route claimed hundreds of aircraft and crew members, yet the Commando's superior performance at high altitude made it better suited than any alternative. The aircraft also participated in major airborne operations in Europe and the Pacific, delivering paratroopers and towed gliders during crucial assaults. The Douglas C-54 Skymaster represented the pinnacle of American wartime transport development. Based on the civilian DC-4, this four-engine aircraft carried 50 troops or 28,000 pounds of cargo across intercontinental distances. Its pressurized cabin allowed high-altitude flight above most weather systems. C-54s established regular scheduled routes linking the United States with Europe, Africa, and the Pacific, creating the first true global military airlift network. President Roosevelt traveled aboard a specially modified C-54 to the Yalta Conference, demonstrating the aircraft's range and reliability. The type evacuated thousands of wounded soldiers, transported priority cargo and personnel, and maintained communication links across theaters separated by oceans. Its operational flexibility allowed rapid redeployment of forces between combat zones as strategic priorities shifted. The Consolidated C-47 Liberator Express emerged from adapting the B-24 bomber for cargo operations. With gun turrets and bomb racks removed, the converted aircraft carried heavy cargo over long distances. C-87s flew the hump route, transported fuel to forward air bases, and moved critical supplies that conventional transports could not accommodate. The type proved mechanically troublesome and dangerous to fly, suffering numerous accidents. Its operational ceiling and range nevertheless made it valuable for specialized missions where no alternative existed. British transport operations. The Armstrong-Whitworth-Whitley served the Royal Air Force initially as a bomber before conversion to transport and paratrooper duties. Its twin engines and capacious fuselage accommodated 10 paratroopers or equivalent cargo. Whitley's dropped British airborne forces during early raids against German-occupied Europe and trained thousands of paratroopers for later operations. The aircraft's obsolescence as a bomber made it expendable for high-risk transport missions deep into enemy territory. The Handley Page Halifax secondary employment as a transport and glider tug despite its primary role as a heavy bomber. Special transport variants carried cargo and paratroopers, while standard bombers towed gliders during major airborne assaults. Halifax transports operated supply missions to resistance forces in occupied Europe, dropping weapons, equipment, and agents by parachute during clandestine night operations. The aircraft's long-range and heavy lift capacity made it suitable for missions beyond the capability of smaller transports. The short Stirling became Britain's first four-engine heavy bomber, but transitioned to transport duties as newer bombers entered service. Its capacious fuselage accommodated substantial cargo loads, while dedicated transport versions carried troops and supplies. Stirlings towed gliders during the D-Day landings and Operation Market Garden, delivering British airborne forces to their objectives. The aircraft also flew supply missions to partisan forces in occupied territories and evacuated wounded from liberated areas. The Avro York emerged from mating a new fuselage to the wings, engines, and tail of the Lancaster bomber. This created a purpose-built transport with superior cargo capacity compared to converted bombers. Yorks carried passengers and freight on routes linking Britain with the Middle East, India, and later occupied Germany. Prime Minister Churchill traveled aboard a York to several wartime conferences. The type remained in service for years after the conflict, proving the soundness of its design. German strategic airlift. The Junkers U-52 formed the backbone of Luftwaffe transport operations throughout the war. This three-engine aircraft featured corrugated metal skin and fixed landing gear, appearing antiquated compared to Allied types. Despite its old-fashioned appearance, the U-52 proved remarkably rugged and reliable. It carried 18 troops or equivalent cargo operating from rough airstrips under primitive conditions. German paratroopers jumped from U-52s during the invasions of Norway, Belgium, Holland, and Crete. The aircraft supplied the Africa Corps across the Mediterranean, sustained isolated garrisons on the Eastern Front, and attempted to resupply surrounded armies at Stalingrad and in the Demyansk pocket. Allied fighters and anti-aircraft defenses inflicted catastrophic losses on U-52 formations, destroying thousands of aircraft and killing or capturing experienced crews. The cumulative attrition crippled German airlift capability, leaving Wehrmacht forces unable to maintain operations in remote theaters or recover from encirclements. The Messerschmitt Me-323 Gigant represented Germany's attempt to create a truly heavy transport aircraft. This six-engine monster evolved from the Me-321 glider, which had proven too large for existing tow aircraft to handle safely. Adding engines created a powered transport capable of carrying 20 tons of cargo or 120 troops. Me-323s supplied German forces in North Africa and later operated on the Eastern Front and in the Mediterranean. The aircraft's enormous size and slow speed made it catastrophically vulnerable to fighters. In April 1943, Allied fighters intercepted a formation of Me-323s crossing the Mediterranean and destroyed 14 aircraft in minutes. Losses forced restriction of operations to nighttime or under heavy fighter escort. Only 200 were built due to high production costs and appalling combat losses. The Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor began as a civilian airliner before military conversion for long-range maritime patrol and transport duties. Its four engines provided range exceeding 2,200 miles. Condors transported high-ranking officials, moved critical cargo, and evacuated wounded from distant fronts. The aircraft's weak structure limited its cargo capacity and made it prone to landing accidents. Nevertheless, its range made it valuable for maintaining communication between Germany and far-flung theaters. Soviet transport aircraft. The Lisanov Li-2 served as the Soviet license-built version of the American DC-37. Production began before the war and continued throughout the conflict, with over 4,000 manufactured. Li-2s performed the same missions as their American C-47 counterparts, transporting troops, cargo, and wounded across the vast Eastern Front. The aircraft dropped Soviet paratroopers behind German lines, resupplied partisan forces, and maintained communication with isolated units. Its reliability under harsh conditions made it essential to Soviet military operations. The Tupolev TB-3 represented an older generation of heavy bomber adapted for transport duties. This massive four-engine monoplane first flew in 1930, but remained operational throughout the war. TB-3s carried paratroopers during the war's early campaigns and transported heavy equipment, including light tanks, to forward areas. The aircraft's obsolescence and vulnerability to modern fighters restricted it to rear area transport missions and training duties as the war progressed. Japanese airlift capabilities. Japan's Kawasaki K-56 emerged as a license-built version of the American Lockheed Lodestar transport. Its twin engines and modern design provided superior performance compared to older Japanese types. The aircraft carried troops and supplies throughout the Pacific and Southeast Asian theaters, sustaining garrisons on remote islands and jungle airfields. Allied air superiority increasingly restricted operations to nighttime flights as the war turned against Japan. The Mitsubishi K-57 served as Japan's primary military transport. Based on the civilian MC-20 airliner, this twin-engine aircraft carried 11 passengers or equivalent cargo. K-57s operated throughout Japanese-occupied territories, moving personnel and priority supplies. The type lacked the capacity and performance of American transports, reflecting Japan's limited industrial resources and strategic focus on combat aircraft rather than support types. The Nakajima K-34 provided short-range transport services. Its twin radial engines and fixed landing gear limited performance, relegating it to secondary routes and training duties as the war progressed. The aircraft nevertheless served throughout the conflict in areas where its modest capabilities proved adequate. Minor powers and specialized types. Italy's Savoia Marchetti SM-82 Marsupial operated as a three-engine transport and bomber. Its mixed construction of metal and wood reflected Italian industrial limitations. The aircraft transported troops and supplies throughout the Mediterranean theater, suffering heavy losses to Allied fighters and anti-aircraft defenses. France operated various transport types before its defeat in 1940, including the Block MB-220 and Farman F-220. These aircraft saw limited wartime service, with some evacuating government officials and valuable cargo during the German invasion. The Commonwealth employed numerous smaller transport types supplementing British and American aircraft. Canadian-built Nordwind Norseman operated in bush-flying conditions, while various impressed civilian types filled gaps in transport capacity. Heavy transport aircraft fundamentally changed military operations. They enabled rapid strategic deployment, sustained forces beyond the reach of surface logistics, and provided commanders with unprecedented operational flexibility. The lessons learned during the conflict shaped post-war military airlift doctrine and led directly to modern strategic transport capabilities. These unglamorous workhorses proved as decisive as any fighter or bomber in determining the war's outcome.